Hi everybody, Zach here for another episode of our flagship program, The Spideydude Experience. This episode is brought to you by our loyal patrons over at patreon.com/Spideydude Network. Pledge today and get both early access to content on the main channel, as well as entirely exclusive content, like brand new shows and commentaries for old Spidey stuff, including commentaries for the MTV series, for example, as well as the video editions for Voices From the Eyrie Gargoyles podcast. And our Patreon first show focused on the Krakoan era of X-Men. We also want to encourage you to check out our other programs that are all available on Audio Edition. These are all over on Spideydude.com, and they're available on your favorite podcasting app. Shows like Clone Saga Chronicles, the show that started this entire network, Spectacular Radio, Spectacular Sal Buscema era podcast, Amazing Spider-Man Classics, the Slot Symposium, and the sister program on this channel, Make Mine Mayday. As always, be sure to hit the like button. It really does help us big time in the algorithm. And additionally, if you have topics you'd like to cover on a live show or in a recorded medium, make sure to leave a comment down below the description or shoot us an email at SpideyDudeRadioNetwork@gmail.com. Finally, make sure to join our community. Be alerted to all new updates by hitting that subscribe button and clicking on the bell. But to be clear, your viewership is more than enough for us. And if you want to hang out with us off YouTube, you can always go to our Discord, where we have all sorts of fun stuff, or you can join us on our social medias and follow us there. All the links are down in the description below. As always, we want to be making some references to visual aids and or live comments. If you're an audio listener, pay that no mind, but leave that 5-star review for us. Any and all feedback we will read on future episodes. Thank you, and without further ado, let's get rolling with this episode of the Spideydude Experience. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode here on the Spideydude Radio Network. This is a very special episode for us, and I'm really excited to bring it to you. It is one of our interviews, and we are bringing back an old friend of the show and a friend of the website and friend of just in general. We've got Greg Weisman with us tonight, but I also have my panelists. So first up, we've got the host of Voices From the Eyrie, a Gargoyles podcast. We got Greg, a co-host of the show, Greg Bishansky.
Hello, hello.
And we have producer Neil, who is the host of the Books of X podcast here on the channel.
And the Transformers military hunted, don't forget that.
Yes, our Transformers coverage here on the channel as well.
Yeah.
Stalwart of the show, we got Adam.
Hello.
And Ashley. Oh,
she's muted. There we go.
Yeah, we got to unmute you. And of
That's
course, the man of the hour himself, Mr. Weisman. So, Greg, welcome back to the show. We really appreciate you taking the time. We're going to talk a lot about some spectacular Spider-Man tonight. And as of this recording, we are about to have issue 15 come out, which we know, according to solicitations, is the last one, unfortunately, which kind of a bummer. But thanks for being back on the show, Greg.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
So let's I kind of want to go through just the book is in general, and obviously the first arc was the Arcadium arc, and you introduced this as a concept. How did that concept come about?
I don't remember. Years ago now. I think that I wanted to explore what was going on under the surface with Peter and Miles, and that led us to a discussion, Nick Lowe and I, about what might literally be going on underneath the ASU campus, which is where they all meet up every Wednesday. Mm-hmm. And I came up with the idea for the Arcadium. I knew I wanted to use Arcade, and then I said I need a telepath to partner with Arcade, and so we went through a bunch of options, and it just seemed like Mentallo was the most fun, and that the two of them would make the most amusing pair. And since I had a pair of heroes, I liked the idea of having a pair of villains, and that both would be exchanging banter and giving each other a hard time. And so that seemed just to really work naturally. And it allowed us to sort of explore the fantasies of our two heroes, plus a handful of other supporting characters. And we had And I like the idea also of sort of at first showing these supporting characters in these situations where, like Turk Barrett and Juliet Marcos and like having the reader going, what does this have to do with anything? There's this girl in Venice. What, huh? And Turk is, making fun of a judge that he's got to testify in front of. What does that have to do with anything? And I just like that to sort of mystify the reader and have them just be curious. And then it all, I think, played out pretty much as we planned from day one.
Neil, you're next, buddy.
Okay, so going into that, you kind of mentioned Arcade and Mentallo as the mirror pair of Peter and Miles. As for the B villain, what kind of inspired you to use the Jackal as one of the antagonists of that first arc?
I think it's an ESU thing. I mean, I think of Jackal as sort of Pete's ultimate college era villain. I think of a lot of his, look, I did the TV show. We did a lot of the villains from all sorts of eras, all sort of conflated into his high school years. But the truth is that a lot of those villains were villains from the Ditko era. But when I think of ESU, the one villain that immediately comes to mind is Jackal. And that it just felt right to do that. Plus, we had decided to use Mr. Warren, his high school teacher, is one of the supporting cast members in the Bean, so that, and it's been established that they're brothers, and that is Miles and Raymond Aaron Warren are brothers. And so it also, everything just seemed to dovetail nicely to use those. And I just had this idea for a Jackal clone that's like takes that sort of goofy Jackal costume and makes it real, but also Hulk size, and makes it really kind of scary. And that made for a great sort of action runner in the first issue that was fun and got us off to, I think, a pretty exciting start.
Dovetailing off that for a second, you eventually used a lot of the Vermin clones and all these different clones. Was it hard to catch up with all that stuff, or was Nick Lowe kind of just guiding you to where what all these different pieces and putting them in place with you?
I mean, my comic book knowledge is really extensive, Spider-Man wise, from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and then the 90s is like a big black hole where I wasn't reading much.
You were a little busy doing a show called Gargoyles, or
Yeah, I mean, I around 96. It really wasn't even Gargoyles. It was just around 1996. I just got, fed up, I think it's fair to say, with comic books. And I stopped reading them for a decade, which is weird because I'd read them all my life. But I didn't set out to stop. A lot of the books that I was enjoying, I had sort of stopped enjoying. And I just wasn't making it a priority to go back then it was Thursdays, every Thursday to the comic book shop. And then after a few months, I sort of realized, oh my God, I haven't been in weeks and weeks and weeks, and I haven't missed it, which was a horrifying revelation to me, to be perfectly honest. So I just stopped reading them. And then in the run-up to doing the Spectacular Spider-Man television series, I'm like, okay, I got to get up to date on Spider-Man. And this was 2007, 2008. I started reading again, catching up on a lot of what was going on in the Marvel Universe. And then I went to do Young Justice and started catching up on all that had been going on in the DC Universe. And so I've got gaps in my knowledge, but there are other places where I'm extremely, my knowledge is pretty extensive.
Right.
maybe not always accurate, but the gist of it is still there. But yeah, there were things I had to catch up on. Again, because I was talking about, I want to know what's going on beneath the surface. So what's literally going on underneath ESU campus felt like a good sort of metaphor for what was going on in the book. And so we started talking about the sewers and what might be down there. And that led to discussion of the vermin clones, which I had read in the Craven run.
Storyline, yeah.
Yeah, where he was kidnapping every character who had an animal in their name. And I'm like, that must be thousands of Marvel characters with animals in their names. And that led to the lizard and everything else that started to play. And then, I guess it's a little repetitive, but this idea that a sort of weird society of outsiders springs up underground, and that goes back, probably influenced by the Morlocks way the hell back in the the 80s and Chris Claremont stuff. But just this idea that that of found family became a major theme of the book, and so I wanted to play into that. And so yeah, there was stuff where Nick was sort of saying, well, vermin are probably down there somewhere, and then we started talking about Shift. It seemed to me that Shift is sort of leading the way there, made sense. And we actually had to have this whole conversation, which I then spelled out in the book because I had the same thoughts, which I'm like, but isn't Shift in Brooklyn? And Nick is going, you do know there's a subway and that there are all these tunnels that's all connected. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. So I was sort of like, that education I put into the dialogue of the book too. Like, and it was a nice role for Shift, I thought, to sort of be coming into his own, and even as he's learning to talk, which had just started in Miles's own title, that he was also sort of coming into his own and becoming a leader in this underground world.
I know it's a huge, like, Ashley loves Shift, so
I do. I really, really appreciated that. He's like my favorite. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I kind of wanted to pivot off of that whole note you made about Shift being in Brooklyn and Lowe mentioning that you mentioned that there was contact with the other book. How much communication was there between you and Cody Ziegler? Because you've mentioned some degree of contact between Lowe and Zeb Wells, because he was the one who was writing ASM when you started. I was just wondering if there was any degree of that similar communication with Ziegler and the Miles branch of the office.
So I had zero. So I imagine that Caden, who was our original assistant editor, and then Tom Groneman and Nick had communication back and forth. But I was only dealing with originally Caden and Nick, and then later Tom and Nick. And so I didn't have any direct communication with Cody or Wells. It was all through Nick, and I don't even know how much of that there was. I mean, one of the things that we all sort of agreed on, and by we again, I'm really meaning Nick and Caden and I at the very beginning, was that, look, Miles has his own book, and that's where his destiny is being decided. And Pete has his own book, and that's where his destiny is being decided. This isn't the book where I decide who he's dating even, or, where he's going to work for a living, how he's going to earn his money, his main relationships. Those are for his titles, and I wanted to respect that. And I just said, let me carve out Wednesday afternoons. It's supposed to be him and Miles getting together to check in, little mental health stuff. And mental health also became a theme of the book. That sort of snuck up on me a bit, but it's become just a big theme for me since I did the 4th season of Young Justice. And so I didn't sort of set out to make that, but it really fit in with everything else we were doing. And particularly when Juliet became a more important character and Elementary became a more important character, that seemed to work. But I think that a big part of it was, let's get these two guys together and let's try and evolve their relationship. And I know, Zach, you and I talked about this over a year ago, but the idea was that I had, and that I pitched to Nick when he first offered me the title, is that Peter's sort of eternally 26 and Miles is sort of eternally 16. But in essence, they've had this relationship for almost 2 decades where Pete is his mentor. Mm-hmm. And I said, that's great, but I've had mentors like Dick Giordano over my boss at DC Comics, or Tad Stones, Gary Kreisel, etc. I've had a bunch of mentors, and I've been a mentor to others. And that's a great way for a relationship to start. But at some point, if it doesn't evolve, then it can't last. Like, I had one guy who was sort of a mentor in my DC Comics early days, in the mid 80s, when I was 21 and he was 25. And those 4 years, he'd been in comics for 4 or 5 years already when I started. That's a big difference. That's a lot of years. But, when I'm 50 or 60 and he's 55 and I've been doing it now for 30 plus years, if our relationship is still him regarding me as his mentee 30 years later, it just becomes kind of preposterous, and it means that we don't really have much of a relationship. But when it's working, mentorship evolves into friendship. And I was saying that I think it's time for Pete and Miles to evolve past the pure mentor-mentee relationship. That'll always be an element of it, but I think it's time for them to just become friends now and check in on each other, make sure they're okay. I've got friends I check in on periodically, some once a month, some more often than that, some less often than that, but people I make an effort to reach out to periodically. And it seemed like that would be a good thing for these two. And then for me, ESU seemed a natural place for that to happen. There's a coffee bean there that's been well established over the decades. Yeah. And it's probably been modernized so that, Miles uses the app and Pete's
I was rereading some of the issues before we got on, and one of the couple of things that stuck out was I had forgotten about the whole gag with Peter, trying to make the
regular, yeah.
And Miles looks at him and is like, just use the app like a normal person.
Right.
Well, I literally had that happen.
Peter in that case is me. I have a creation near my house, and I go in, and the two guys who work there, Kevin and David, they know my name, they know my order, and boom, they get, and it's so much fun to be a regular there, just get my smoothie handed to me exactly the way I want it. It's not like I don't pay for it and I tip them and everything like that, but that's what I like. I want to be regular. I don't want to use the app and be some faceless guy that walks in and that kind of thing. And that's how Peter is. He wants that human contact. And Miles is rolling his eyes going, why are you making this hard? And I think that's sort of the difference. I realize that Peter's supposed to be 26 and not as old as he would be in reality, which is 72 or something at this point. But it still felt to me like Peter's an older soul, and so that whole thing just felt right. And so that's the way we took it. Again, it was an early discussion. It's what I pitched to Nick sort of on, well, day 2. Day 1 was Nick coming to me and trying to talk me into doing the book, and it was literally like a sitcom. He's like, so we want to do a regular title with Peter and Miles together. I'm like, oh yeah. And he's like, and we've got Ramos to do the art. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, no, wait, hear me out. And I'm like, you do know I said yes already, right?
Stop trying to sell me. Stop trying to sell me the book.
Yeah, I was totally into it from moment one. So it was.
That's awesome. Speaking of, there was one line in issue 1 that just made me laugh, which was I'm internally in homeroom for the last decade. I feel like I've been eternally in homeroom the last decade, and I like that as a commentary of Miles. Is like he aged pretty rapidly for a few years, and then he's just been stuck at 16 ever since.
Yeah, well, and then the same with Peter. He graduated high school, went to college, went to graduate school, and then graduated from graduate school, and then boom, he's pretty much been 26 for a very, very long time.
Yeah. Adam, you got a question?
Yes. Did any of your plans for any plot points or storylines need to be adjusted or changed as the book came out?
I mean, there were certain things. If you issue 15 comes out tomorrow and you see the beginning, unfortunately it's the last issue, so that's all you'll see of it, but you'll see the very beginning of a story that I had planned to be the second major arc. And there was just this feeling that stuff that had been done in the main Spider titles was too close, and it was like push that story down the road a little. So we pushed Elementary forward a bit. It was all stuff I wanted to do, and unfortunately now that what was going to be the second arc and is now the third arc, but all you're going to see of it is the sort of inciting incident involving Libra that picks up a little bit from what I did and didn't get to finish either in Starbrand and Night Mask a decade ago. I keep trying to tell this story and I keep getting interrupted by cancellation, which may be the universe trying to tell me something, but I refuse to listen apparently.
Somebody at Marvel's gonna be like, all right, let Greg tell this story. I mean,
Yeah.
Eventually, it'll happen eventually.
When do we get the Libra return?
We reordered the Libra. The Libra thing was supposed to come second, and then there was just a feeling like that's a good story, but we did something kind of similar to that. Let's just reorder them. Do the Elementary one first, and then we'll do Libra one. And unfortunately, the book sales just. Nick was very kind, and maybe that's all it was just being kind. He said that for a secondary Spider title, 15 issues was a pretty good run. I'm from an older school, and I thought 15 issues, that's nothing.
Yeah.
And I just sort of felt like I kind of feel like I let the readers down, that the book just didn't have the legs that I was hoping it would have. But I'm very proud of the 15 issues we did. I mean, I love them all. Issue 11 in particular really tickles me. But I really, I thought I was really proud of issue 1 and issue 8 and everything in between, really. And I really love issue 15. I think it turned out fantastic. But
yeah, thanks to speaking of that, I wanted to shout out Anthony and the crew for letting us peek behind the curtain and get to read that issue early and let us.
Yeah. So I'm really proud of what we did. I wish it had gone longer for all sorts of reasons. Not the least is that, I could use the money, but
yeah.
But also I love doing these characters. I love writing Peter. We had a great time briefly. Josh Keaton and the gang all doing those little motion comics, for a handful of issues was just a lot of fun for me to get to hear Josh do my dialogue as Pete and Spidey again, getting Lacey to do Gwen, getting Andrew Kishino to do Kenny Kong again. And then, I mean, in my head, I feel like Zeno Robinson's sort of the perfect Miles Morales. So getting bringing Zeno in to play Miles was a great treat. And the great thing is they really enjoyed doing it. It really, Josh did all the hard work. I sort of said, do this page, and they did it. And I didn't have to do anything else, really.
There was no directing. You didn't have to direct them.
No, that was all Josh, really. But they were into it, and I just had lunch the other day. Jamie Thomason birthday lunch that Jamie, of course, didn't show up for. But
sounds about right.
Yeah, it's pretty typical. But Andrew Kashino and Josh Keaton and Zara Fuzzle, who played Kamala Khan for us in those little shorts, and others were there. And Andrew was like, Kashino was like thanking me, like, "Oh, thanks for letting me do that." And I'm like, "You do understand you were doing me a favor, right? I mean, it was great. I really enjoyed it, but I owe you the thanks, not the other way around."
What did
they
Marvel?
had fun? They loved it. They loved those characters, and so
Yeah.
it was great fun for us to be able to do that.
What was Marvel's reaction on that?
They were tickled by it. I mean, it was all unofficial, right? I mean, because officially, if you make it official, then all sorts of lawyers have to get involved. So it was all sort of like, oh, we're just doing this as a kind of fan thing.
Right.
But I think, Humberto got a huge kick out of it. So did Nick and the others, I assume. But I know Humberto really enjoyed it. And Nick did too. And they were very helpful because I had to get, for Josh, in order to edit these things, I had to get PDFs of the finished art with colors and letters on it. And I couldn't have done that without Nick and Caden, and then later Tom's help. So,
Caden was the one that helped, bring you forward when they were just kind of murmuring about this particular title. Right?
Yeah, with Caden, they were the one who suggested me for it. Had been reading the Gargoyles titles I've been doing for Dynamite and really liked the stuff, and then remembered that, of course, I had done Spidey for 26 episodes, and suggested me to Nick. And Nick is also a big fan of Spectacular Spider-Man. Sorry.
You're gonna have that Freudian slip every time now.
Yeah. Nick was a big fan of the TV show, and so again, I think he thought that I was a bigger deal than I am, because again, when he called me, it was like he really felt like he had to talk me into it, and I was like going, no, I'm totally into this already. So there was no big sales thing that needed to be done.
So I've kind of got a weird question. In the back half of the book, there's kind of a smorgasbord of characters who kind of cameo for a bit. And one that kind of threw me off was Mia the Magic Girl from Hickman's G.O.D.S series.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of threw everybody for a loop because I was the only one in our panel who had read G.O.D.S. I think I am the one who has still read G.O.D.S.
Yep.
So that one in particular, I kind of want to know what the method to the madness was on that one. Like, was it a suggestion from editorial, or was that like a pick that you had dug out of your research and you're like, hey, look, a newer character that no one's really using right now. Can I borrow her for a bit?
Nick was pretty excited about G.O.D.S, and I don't know what Marvel's plans are or might be vis-a-vis G.O.D.S, but he seemed to feel like this was gonna be a big thing. And so he got me a bunch of advanced stuff. I picked Mia, but the idea was we knew we needed someone magical to help, because that Elementary's powers would be magic based, not sci-fi based, right? Mm-hmm. And so I picked Mia. I could have picked any of the characters. Well, there were really only three. There were three big candidates from G.O.D.S that and Mia seemed like the one that would, again, best connect up with what we were doing in our book. Someone who was new to it and just gotten her feet wet and yet was being asked by Doctor Strange to go help these people out. They don't know what they're doing, and neither do you. It's a good match. And so that seemed to work. But I enjoyed G.O.D.S quite a bit. I thought it was a great read. I have no idea what the overall plans were. I know that Nick definitely had a moment there where he was really excited about it and felt that us having a guest star from G.O.D.S would help sales. I don't know if it did or didn't. I don't know if anyone knew that she was in there. But I was glad to have her because, again, I needed a magical character. And we talked about various people. The one that I was leaning towards prior to reading G.O.D.S was Clea, because I've always liked her quite a bit. But I liked Mia a lot from G.O.D.S. And again, it just felt really great to have someone with so little experience being the one being brought over to what the larger Marvel universe must have felt like was a really low priority assignment. So every Wednesday, just go over there, get a coffee, and try and help them out.
Having read G.O.D.S, I can confirm that if you had used the grizzled old Irish man, it probably wouldn't have had the same connect as Mia.
Yeah, she just felt like from that series, like the one that fit perfectly with what we wanted to do.
Interesting. Thank you.
All right. I got to ask this question for the Mary Jane fans on this channel, but what made Gwen the love interest for the idyllic world of the Arcadium, and for that matter, Kamala Khan?
Well, two different things. In terms of Gwen versus MJ, and actually we talk about this in issue 8 of the book. Pete literally talks about this, but the idea I had when talking it over with Nick in New York, some trip I was in New York, I think to see my son, who doesn't live there now, but did at the time. Nick and I had lunch, and I basically thought the Arcadium's all about dopamine, right? It's all about sort of putting you in a situation that makes you so happy that your dopamine levels rise, and you literally become chemically addicted to the kind of happiness that the Arcadium provides as you fulfill these fantasies. And the thought I had was that there was a limit to how buried you could bury something, and that Pete's relationship, particularly as it currently stands with MJ, is so painful that it couldn't stay buried. And as we saw, his thing with Gwen couldn't stay buried either, but it lasted longer. I don't think if it had been MJ, it could have lasted even as long as it did. And if you go back to Gwen, there's so many mistakes that get corrected. Captain Stacy doesn't have to be dead. And the only mistake that I said you just can't correct, that Peter's brain wouldn't allow you to correct it, is the death of Uncle Ben. That you can't go back that far. That then there's no Peter left. It so defined his life that hypothetical of what would my life have been like if Uncle Ben had lived, he's got no basis for comparison. I mean, he's got nothing from a fantasy standpoint, no way to understand how that life could have been. But a life with Gwen, and one of the things Pete says in issue 8 is, we were so young, who knows if it would have worked out long term. But what I know is that in this fantasy, we got married, we had kids. I was happy. And I think that, again, a thing with Mary Jane, it's not about me picking Gwen over Mary Jane as like his ultimate girlfriend or even his ultimate fantasy girlfriend. It's about, given who Pete is, I don't think he could bury his feelings for his pain regarding Mary Jane, whereas his pain regarding Gwen is pretty straightforward. If she lives, that pain goes away. But Mary Jane isn't dead. They've tried multiple times. Now, we could get into the whole Mephisto of it all, I suppose. But, you know, I'm not in this book to challenge what now, 15 years of editorial policy. That's not, I don't have the power to do that. That's not my thing. So you have to deal with who Pete views Mary Jane as now, not as some fan's interpretation of what it should have been if only in 2008 they hadn't done X. You know, I can't do that. This is the continuity now, and I just felt like that kind of pain, it couldn't have become a fantasy for him. It's too complicated. But the Gwen thing is pretty straightforward. She lives, and all is well. And you know, and I'm an old fart, right? So seeing Gwen and Pete together in a happy marriage, and you know, throwing in a celebrity hockey reference and then having him turn off the show to have sex with his wife, to me, that's a good fantasy, and that's what the Arcadium wants. They want the AI wants the fantasy to be feeding his dopamine levels so that he becomes more and more addicted. But what it means is when the fantasy finally falls apart, it is crushing. And that was what we were trying to get out of it. That as good as the fantasy might be for Pete, for Miles, for Juliet and the others, when it goes away, it is devastating. And it's literally like you're going through withdrawal. And that's what we were trying to get across. In terms of Miles and Kamala, that was again a discussion with Nick, and I think it'd be really interesting because I've read Champions, and I felt like they were platonic friends, but there was always this little hint of things to me. Maybe I was reading into it, but it felt like it was there. And I thought it'd be interesting if, you know, despite the fact that he's got a great girlfriend in Tiana in his title, what if here in this fantasy, it seemed to me that Kamala had died and had come back to life. And in losing her, that might have triggered something when she returns, like, wow, I really missed my chance. I don't want to miss it again. And of course, he's not going to act on that, A, because he's dating someone, but B, because he's a teenager. He doesn't even know how to act on that, you know? But it seemed to me that would be an interesting thing to A, explore in a fantasy, and B, what are the repercussions of that? Like for Pete, the repercussions of, oh, I was in dating, well, Gwen is still dead. You know, you can't do anything about that. But for Miles, I thought those are some interesting repercussions. Now, whether or not in Miles' title, particularly now that we're canceled, whether or not anyone picks up on that, I have no control over.
Right.
But from the standpoint of me as a creator, I thought this is a fascinating situation to put Miles in. And then it also allowed me to do that sort of comedic bit where we introduced Adam to, you know, the other 2/3 of Adam's triad. And you have this moment where Miles is thinking, well, wait, if I could have Tiana and Kamala, and Pete's like, don't even think about it. He's like, I wasn't. It's like, no, he was, but he was thinking about it the way a 16-year-old thinks about it, not the way a serious, you know,
Sure.
person would think about it.
I gotta, you know, you mentioned earlier that you're a regular at your smoothie shop. But how big of a Cheers fan are you? Because the whole bit with,
I'm a huge fan of the first 5 seasons and a fan of the seasons after Diane left. But the first 5 seasons, I think, are phenomenal. And yeah, there was a lot of Cheers influence in this book, without a doubt.
for those that don't know,
when Norm walks in, everybody yells his name, Norm. So,
and my thinking is that Pete has also binge watched Cheers and was literally like trying to recreate that experience at the Bean, and no one else there has watched Cheers, so they don't know what he's up to. And so when he says lines from Cheers like, you know, you want to be where everybody knows your name, they don't realize that's from the theme song of Cheers. They just like, okay, yeah, you want them to know your name. I get it. But aren't you overdoing this? You know, it was my idea to have them call out my name when you come in. Okay, yeah, sure, Pete, whatever.
Okay, Grandpa, let's get you to bed.
Neil, you got another question?
Yeah, so I kind of want to go back to Arcade and Mentallo for a second. Mostly Mentallo, because something I picked up on was Mentallo's costume was from Al Ewing and Valerio Schiti's Sword series. Was that a deliberate use of his costume, or was that kind of just the most recent one you guys decided, let's just use that one?
I mean, I think it's the most recent one, but really that's an Humberto question. I mean, in other words, it's not like I, in my script said, and make sure you're using the costume from this specific era. So any decision on what costume to use was some conversation at most between Humberto and Nick, I would think, or Humberto just picked that one. And I don't actually know the answer to that.
Okay.
Another design question. What went into the design of NAVE? Was that all Humberto?
It was. I mean, what I described in the script was think of like a bad AI picture where you've described a and it comes up with something where it's like the wrong amount of fingers on one hand, or just AI, bad Chat GPT image of mismatched asymmetrical shit, but still has to look threatening. And so I mean, those weren't my exact words, but it was pretty close to what I wrote. And Humberto just put that together, and I thought it looked badass and actually a lot cooler than what I was thinking we were going for. But it's hard to sort of go, oh, I didn't want it to look that cool. I wanted it to look strange. Because it did look really cool. And so I thought, well, this is great. Let's just go with this. So, and again, the idea is that everything the AI NAVE knows, he knows from the internet and from observing Arcade and Mentallo and Hammerhead. And so, and maybe to a lesser extent, Turk. So, he's envisioning what a supervillain is based on this knowledge, and comes up with NAVE out of that, including the acronym. This is what a supervillain must be. The AI decides. So that's how I'm going to present myself.
How big of a bummer was it when you lost Humberto after the first arc?
Well, I kind of knew it was coming. I mean, it was kind of part of the deal. It was on the one hand a huge bummer, but I think we got some really stunning work from Andres and from Emilio. So it's
double-edged sword, sounds like.
Yeah, I was really happy with the art we were getting, but I missed Humberto as a partner on the book, and and obviously I don't think it helped sales to go from a top artist like Humberto to we're under the gun, and so Emilio is going to do half the pages, Andres is going to do half, and then Von Randall is going to take half the pages of one issue. And again, all the art was great. I thought it was all fantastic, but that doesn't have a great, from a promotional standpoint, a great look to it, that we're jumping around between 2 or 3 artists with some of the issues literally being drawn by multiple artists, and then other issues, got a couple issues by Emilio, then a couple issues by Andres. And again, I loved all that art. I thought they did a phenomenal job, but I think from if you're a comic shop looking to order or pre-order titles, that isn't a great look, promotionally. Yeah. So that hurt a little. And again, I just love the work that Humberto and Victor were doing. And then, we had Edgar Delgado through the whole run, and he really did, I think, bring everything. It still felt of a piece. I don't feel like it was jarring or anything like that. But so, mixed, I guess, is the short answer. After the long answer, I'll give you the short answer second.
So now when you were shifting between the two, did you have to change your approach, or was that just all you're putting in the scripts and Nick's having to play quarterback and
Nick and I, when we had those couple issues where we had multiple artists on the issues, I discussed with Nick okay, let's give these sections to one guy and these sections to the other guy, that it'll give you the most consistency. It didn't change how I'd written it because I'd already written it. But I was able to sort of say, let's do all these coffee bean scenes with one guy, then we'll do all these non-coffee bean scenes with the other guy. And that way it won't be jarring literally every time you turn the page, kind of thing. And we had discussions like that for the issues that were literally two artists working on the same single script. But
yeah, I've noticed that's kind of been a trend a lot of times when they're having multiple artists, they'll do specific scenes to keep it kind of tonally consistent.
Yeah, I think it's helpful. I mean, look, I started off back so long ago in the 80s as a comic book editor, and it's not like I've never been under a deadline crunch where you needed multiple artists, and that's just, I think, the best. It doesn't help to sort of do, you take the first 12 pages of the book and you take the second 12, then you get to page 13 and boom, it's really jarring. But if all the scenes in this location are done by the same artist, also, I write each comic book page I write, I try to make each page tell a story. So it's not then you'll have to do half of page 5 and the other guy will do the bottom half of page. That's not the way I write. Just organically, that's not the way I write. So I don't have those kind of problems. It's more okay, it's a cleaner divide, I guess. But it isn't an arbitrary divide. You take the first 7 pages, I'll take the next 9.
I've seen some of those comics too, so
I have too, and I think it's a tougher read as a reader, just going through and just suddenly it's a different artist is a tougher sell.
Ashley, you had a question?
Yeah, we were talking. Well, you were talking about the design and stuff previously, and you guys also had Elementary in this series, and I was kind of wondering what the thought process and the inspiration behind her was for this to bring her in.
Yeah, so I really kind of fell in love with Juliet's character even before we knew that she was going to become a superhero. And then at some point toward the end of the first arc, we started talking about the second arc, and then the whole conversation came up of let's push the second arc to the third arc and do the third arc first or second. It gets complicated, but basically one of the things that Nick and I started talking about is it'd be great to have introduce a brand new hero in the book. And the character that seemed most primed for that because she was least likely, her story was so sort of internal was Juliet. And again, with one of the themes being what's beneath the surface, it's like, okay, Juliet's fantasy seems pretty straightforward. She's in love with this girl in her dorm, Anna, and Anna doesn't notice her because Juliet is so shy. And in her fantasy, Anna's in love with her, and they're traveling through Europe. And isn't this lovely and wonderful? And don't we have great kisses, right? And it's not complicated. It's just sort of lovely, right? But what's going on beneath the surface? And beneath the surface, you have a girl whose family is from the Philippines. They're Catholic. She's gay. This is a problem. This has rendered her, this and other things have rendered her very shy, and hardly noticed in her life. And no one dislikes Juliet. No one dislikes Juliet. And I wanted to be careful. I didn't want to turn Anna into some kind of villain because she wasn't in love with Juliet. She had a girlfriend, Ricky, you know. I wanted it to be, you know, Anna's a decent person, but that doesn't mean that by definition she has to be in love with the person that the reader wants her to be in love with, right? And so it just started me thinking about what's beneath the surface there. And then it literally becomes this thing like, I don't know if you've noticed, but Marvel has a lot of superheroes, and they're a lot, there are all sorts of different powers. So I tried to come up with something that felt fresh and yet iconic. And so this idea of the 4 elements, I did this TV show called Witch, where you had these girls with the 4 classic, each one had that. And I thought, well, what if one character had all these powers, you know, one at a time? Little bit of Ultra Boy there, you know, can't do all of them at once, but she can switch between them. That's why there are a couple of covers where she's doing all 4 at once, and I'm like, no, that's wrong. That's not right. And I'm like, it's a cover, so okay, whatever. But I'm like, we're never doing that in the thing. She can only do one at a time. And then, you know, thinking about that, at first there was like, how did the Arcadium do this? And I'm like, no, it's not like the Arcadium was the radioactive spider, you know, and this gave her these powers. That makes no sense to me. But what did make sense, particularly after reading G.O.D.S, actually, was this idea that is in G.O.D.S, which is that Mia could have gone through her life and never noticed her affinity to magic if it hadn't been sort of brought up to her. But once it is, it can't go away. So the idea was that the combination of the Arcadium and then her encounter with the real Anna was so traumatizing that it activated this thing that was always inside her, but may never have been activated if not for all this stuff. So the Arcadium is the cause of it, but not in the radioactive spider sense. It's the cause that it emotionally screwed her up so much that this flared, like, and this happens in real life to people, you know, you undergo stress and you undergo trauma, and some physical thing in your body can come up and become a real, you know, physical problem for you. And if you had not had any of this stress or trauma, it might never, it would always be sort of lurking in your physiognomy, but it might never have come out if your life had just gone smoothly. This is a real world thing. So it felt like that was a good metaphor for that. And then, you know, putting her through the paces of, okay, you don't have to be a hero, but you need to be able to control your power so you're not setting things on fire or crushing people's hands by accident. And evolving her from this place of just teach me how to use this so I can just pop into being a human again and never do it ever again. but Juliet's too good a person for that. So that when Pete and Miles go off to fight the Electros, and all these great people have been trying to help her, she's like, I really should go help. And so she's kind of a natural hero. And that was all sort of what we were trying to build to, is that someone who starts from a point of this is an affliction and takes it to the point of, okay, but I'm going to do the best I can with it. And I'm not very good, but I'm going to try.
You know, you mentioned the Electros. You had the duality of the two villains in the first arc, but it felt like you were having a ball writing the two Electros, Max and Francine. I mean, guess Maxine's the kind of their.
That's their ship name.
That's their ship.
It is.
Canonize it.
Francine calls him Maxine at one point because he says to her, Francine, and she goes, Maxine. I was having a ball writing that. I mean, I had this idea when we moved up this to this being the second arc. I was like, okay, I've got two Spider-Man and there are two Electros there, and I want to play with that. And the idea that Maxine once upon a time had been, in essence, a groupie. And it had gone really, really badly. Like, she died. But then she was cloned, and now she's back. And it's sort of like, I could see why that would really piss him off that she's using his name, because he's not gone. And I could see
he got better too.
Like, I don't owe you anything. You killed me. And he's like, that was an accident. And I told you not to kiss me. Why'd you kiss me? And she's like, because you're hot. And he's like, well, you're hot too. And I just thought, this is perfect for this theme of strange love, which is that you've got these two people who are theoretically trying to kill each other, and they literally can't because their only power is electricity, and they absorb and release electricity. So there's nothing they can do to each other. So they've got to find some other way to solve their conflict. And then as the conflict continues, particularly once Lizard gets involved, they just realize that they're just totally into each other. But what I try to indicate in the last issue is that it may not be quite smooth sailing as they're driving, and she's like, you're not using the tunnel. And he's like, it's the fastest way out of here at this time of day. And she's like, are you fucking crazy? And to me,
I agree with her.
Like, you know, there's a lot that they have in common, and a lot of clearly sort of animal magnetism that they feel towards each other, but they haven't actually tried to, you know, do real life together yet. So that, you know, it's a little iffy whether they're going to make it as a couple, and I'm good with that. So, you know, again, my sense of things is that I do stuff in these little books like Starbrand and Nightmask or Spectacular Spider-Man, and who knows if anyone ever picks up on anything I did, or if it just gets ignored down the road. But the next time you see them, they may be split up, and that isn't a huge surprise. But if they're still together, that's kind of cool.
Which do you think is funnier? Like if someone picks up and continues it, or if they just ignore it? Which kind of, I don't know if that's like what's funnier, but like, you know, is there like a reaction to that, or?
I mean, you always sort of want people to pick it up, or at least you think you do. Then when they do, the question becomes, yeah, but what do they do with it? And sometimes it's great, and sometimes you're like, oh no, don't do that with those characters.
That's not what I meant to do. You're doing it wrong.
I mean, you know, it's always, but that's the price you pay of, you know, the big sandbox. You know, there are a lot of toys in the sandbox. You know, none of the people who are playing with these toys own the sandbox. Some big corporation owns the sandbox, right? So, but if you want to play with these toys, that's the risk you take. You know, people may ignore stories you created, or they may pick up on them. They may do a great job at carrying it forward, or they may kind of do something that you feel screws it up. but that's, life in the sandbox, and you have to be okay with that. Otherwise, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. And if that's something you really can't deal with, then don't play in the goddamn sandbox in the first place.
There you go.
And I enjoy playing in the sandbox, and sometimes the end result is literally nothing, and sometimes it's something, but that I'm not thrilled with. But every once in a while, someone picks up on something I was doing, and I'm like, yeah, that was it. You got it. This guy got it, and it's great. And but I still, for me, it's like I still had fun when I was playing in the sandbox. What happens after I can't control, so I sort of have to be more zen about it, and not sweat that too much.
Gotcha.
Well, while you were playing in the sandbox, coming up with these ideas, seeing all the different things that you could do, what kind of gave you this story, like the non-linear path for this? Was that some sandbox kick around idea, or
No, I think I've just become I find that really appealing as a writer, to do that. I think for the first issue, it was a pragmatic thing.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I wanted to start with action. I wanted to open on action and then flash back to find out what, Miles is bitching at Peter about this wasn't supposed to be, this is supposed to be just humor. This is what you told me, that we were just getting together to have coffee, nothing arachnobatic about it at all. And he's like, I know. And then so you flash back to it and you find out, what are they talking about? Oh, this is what they're talking about. And I just sort of became, for lack of a better term, enamored of that. And it seemed to really work for this title to be bouncing around. There were some issues where I barely did it at all, and other issues where I did it a ton.
I know it was a lot for me, honestly. It was really difficult, but somebody did mention, and this is something I did want to bring up, is that page count or something might have been cut through them or something, like through the first ones. Wasn't that something that happened in the storytelling?
No. I mean, the first issue was longer, which was, it's nice to have that elbow room. Mm-hmm. And then somewhere through the run, a 22-page per issue title became a 20-page issue title. And they wanted me to do that on an issue I'd already finished the script at 22 pages.
So you had to cut out then?
No, I begged them. I said, guys, this is done. Can we, I'll start at 20 in the next issue, but this one's done and it's working. And they said, okay. So I never had to,
remove anything?
No, never.
Oh, that's good. Because I didn't know if that was the case. I forget where that had came about or where I heard it. So I wasn't sure if that affected the storytelling or, if things got cut out and changed,
no,
if it would have changed anything.
Fewer pages is fewer pages. It's always nicer to have more pages per issue because there's just more elbow room. I can do some big panels when I really want something to pop. I can spend a little more time on a quiet scene if I've got 22 pages than if I've got 20. But in terms of an actual script, there was never a moment when, suddenly this issue is shorter than it was supposed to be. Like I said, there was one issue where they said you've got to make it 22, and I begged off, and they said okay, and it stayed 22. And then when I started the next issue, I knew when I started writing it, it was only 20. So it's not like I ever got sort of caught off guard by it. Because the only time when I might have been, I just sort of begged and they said, okay. So, I mean, Nick was really was a great boss for me on this title. It was always fun working with him. He was always really, open to what I wanted to do, and where I needed things like I need a psychic or I need a magic person or something like that. We had talks. I mean, initially when it was like, oh, I want to train elementary, it's like, so I want to bring in some cameos, and I really wanted to do Ben and Johnny. And then okay, I need a water person and I need an air person. And he gave me a list of various characters, and some of whom I were familiar with and others that I was not, like Wave, for example, I didn't know. And he was like, well, you could use this one or this one. And I was like, I like them both. Let's use both. And it just became this thing and the Hydra Man thing was really fun. I just thought it played out nicely, and
it was fun.
So I was just really having a good time, and Nick probably thinks I went crazy with the supporting cast, but I do that on everything I do. Everything.
Yeah, I was.
I know that Nate thinks I'm go crazy with the supporting cast in Gargoyles, and I'm always got too many characters. But to me, that's world building. That the world always, you meet someone and that person has people and etc. in it, and the world always is going to keep growing. And a lot of people are like, great, but you don't have to meet them all in every issue. And I'm like, you are absolutely right. But I'm going to put them all in every issue anyway. So,
you brought up Wave and Arrow, but I think it was in issue 9, like out of nowhere. Oh, here's the cast of NYX, and I was like, I was wondering if that was a cast that Nick threw your way, or if that was one you kind of stumbled across. I'm like, oh yeah, I like that, and if it tied it all with the Miss Marvel connection that you had with Miles in the Arcadium storyline.
It was it started with Ms. Marvel, obviously. And then it was like, you're trying to figure out what Juliet is. So it's like, well, one obvious thing is maybe she's a mutant, so we need someone to check that. And now Ms. Marvel's a mutant, but she's only been a mutant for a hot second, right? I mean, she has in theory been a mutant all this time, but she's only known that she was a mutant for a hot second. So, but she's got a couple teammates now, and they're here on the ESU campus. How perfect is that? So I got this idea that one thing they would check is that they needed someone to check, are we sure this is the real Juliet and not like one of NAVE's creations, right? So they bring in Viv Vision, and then Viv is like,
that, by the way.
Oh, well, she's not a robot or an android, because I had already read all the Champion stuff and really enjoyed it for the most part, 98% of it, I would say. And so Viv's like, let's call in Ms. Marvel, and Miles is like, wait, because
hold up, wait a second.
Got like feelings about her right now, and he's not ready to deal with them. But she's already done it, and so she shows up and she brings a couple of her teammates, David and Sophie, and they are scanning her, Juliet, that is, and that leaves this space for Miles and Kamala to have this incredibly awkward conversation, which again, I just enjoy writing. Awkward conversations can be really bad for the characters, but really fun for the writer.
Just like me, for real.
So we did reach out whenever we were working on the planning of this to our Discord community. We don't normally throw questions out there, but we thought, well, let's do something a little different with this interview. And so Adam's going to start with our Discord questions and ask them away.
Okay.
All right. Inquisitive Wordsmith has a few. He asks, these are about Spectacular Spider-Man. He asks, how is the length of each story arc determined? You mentioned in the past that certain villains were off limits. Was this the case for certain supporting characters as well? And how old is this Sally Avril?
Okay, let's deal with those one at a time.
Yeah.
The Sally character is vaguely in her early 20s.
All right.
And I say that because Peter is vaguely in his mid 20s. So it's a little hard to judge, but to me, she's sort of vaguely in her early 20s. She's clearly older than high school Sally. But and not so young that it would be, not that they're gonna date, but that it would be weird for her to find, creepy for her and Peter to maybe someday try something. I was just very fascinated with the idea that that girl from Amazing Fantasy 15 who rejected him is now sort of in his life and kind of interested. And he's dating someone else in his own title. And like I said, it's not my place in the whole Spider universe right now to be dictating Peter's love life. But I like the idea that they could have a nice moment, and that again, you've got this situation where she's a clone, which is messed up. She goes to her parents, and of course, from her parents' standpoint, she's been dead for years, and she says, yeah, I understand that, I'm a clone. And they're like, then you're not our daughter. And she doesn't, it's got to be very painful for her because she feels like she is, but they don't feel like she is. They feel like she's some kind of weird scientific abomination kind of thing. And so the fact that Peter, given his own experience, life being as weird as his life has been, her being a clone, that's the least of the least of his problems. So I wanted to make it like a possibility without sort of saying no, because he's dating Shay right now, and he's got to give that a real chance. And what were the other two questions? Sorry.
Were there any supporting cast members that you wanted to use but you couldn't? And how was it? How were the arcs determined? The length of the arcs?
Right. So supporting characters, no. I mean, I didn't want to use much of the main cast. I mean, it wasn't like I asked to use those characters because, again, it didn't make sense. This is Wednesday afternoons at a specific coffee bean on the ESU campus. So why the hell would Mary Jane be there? Or why would Jonah be there, or whoever? It's not that I don't have tremendous love for those characters, but it just wouldn't make any sense. And I also wouldn't be able to do much with them because they're main title supporting cast. So I was looking for characters that were intentionally more obscure or only tangentially related. And then, of course, obnoxious human being that I am, I started bringing in slowly, one by one, all these characters from Starbrand and Nightmask that, again, I didn't get to finish playing.
Yeah, I started noticing that, especially me and
Bishansky. I'm me, and I never let anything. I'm like a dog with a bone. I can't let anything go. So, and then in terms of lengths of the arcs, when we started, it's like it's a monthly series. It's not a mini series. I'm like, so what does that mean? Like, and they're like, at least 7 issues. We're guaranteeing you 7, but sales will dictate how many we do. So I'm like, okay, so I'll do a 7-issue arc. Then I found out after the fact that when they're doing the trades, they do them in 5-issue blocks. I'm like, why didn't you tell me that? I would have done a 5-issue arc.
That actually threw me off.
Yeah,
when
we were wondering
looking
about
at
that.
They have like the solicit mags at the Avon local shop, and they gave me one, and I'm like, wait a second. There's 7 issues solicit, but there's 5 in the trip. What's going on? The story clearly isn't over yet.
No,
what's happening?
I don't understand, and I think there may have been a little of the left hand at corporate not knowing what the right hand was doing or something. I'm not clear on it. Nick was apologetic, but he sort of said, we sort of had a plan, and then the plan changed. I mean, I've been speaking of Starbrand and Nightmask, that was supposed to be a monthly book. And then the solicits for issue 1 were Lowe, which to me wasn't surprising. These were incredibly obscure characters. And I'm like, well, what did you think issue 1 was going to be? You have to give this book time to grow. And they're like, no, it's canceled. We're just going to do 5 issues. And
Dang.
I'm like, the first issue hasn't even come out yet. Yeah, but it's 5 issues. And I'm like, guys, and again, I have to say, Marvel giveth, Marvel taketh away, right? Like with that 22-20 page thing I was saying earlier, I said to them, look, this was totally built as a 6-issue story arc. Can we just do 6 issues instead of 5? And they said yes. I mean, they didn't have to. I have no power. But they went and let Starbrand Nightmask be 6. And when they released the trade, it was 6 issues. So, plans change and sales sometimes aren't at a level that they want it or hope it will be. And so that changes plans. I don't know why they switched from 7 issues down to 5 for the trade, but I think that's become sort of their standard, 5 issues per trade. And so the second trade came out, and it's got the last 2 issues of the Arachnobatics arc and the first 3 issues of the Strange Love arc. And I'm like, all right, whatever.
I think on Tom Brevoort's Substack, he did mention that Marvel's new policy is like 5 to 6 issues per trade. So it's, like you said, it's entirely possible there was like some kind of miscommunication between the departments.
Yeah, I think something like that, or just a change. It shifted, and we got caught in the middle of a shift. When it came to the second arc being 8 issues, that was really I think originally I was thinking it would be like 5 or 6, and then it became this thing where the arcs are now breaking hard at 5. I mean, the trades are breaking hard at 5, 10, 15, and at some point in there, and I don't quite remember the order, it was like, well, then the second arc is going to get split up too. There's no way I can do this whole arc in only 3 issues. So I might as well make it 8. And then it became, I was told that 15 would be the last one. And so it seemed silly to start a third arc, in issue 14 or something like that. So I might as well, give Strange Love some real breathing room, let it play out all the way through the end of issue 15. And then again, because I'm a perverse son of a bitch, I started the third arc on the second to last page of issue 15. But I think it's fun. You don't have to take it too seriously. I think those last couple pages are kind of amusing. And
I literally said to Bishansky, I said that open ending.
Yeah,
that kind of reminds me of the end of JLU when all the heroes are going off to continue their adventures.
The adventure continues.
Yeah, so never the end has sort of become my catchphrase, and so I just am doing it yet again.
All right, so we're kind of looking through these questions, and I want to kind of because we know we've only got a few more minutes with you before you got to get out of here. So
it's true.
I love the glint in the glasses when you said that it's true.
Yeah.
Anime villain stuff.
Greg, you want to ask the next question, then we'll kind of
wrap it up. I'll leave it to somebody else if they want it.
Okay, I'll go ahead and throw it. I was wondering your thoughts on how the art of this is from our Discord. I was wondering your thoughts on how the art of writing superhero comics has changed from when you started with Captain Atom back in the day to now working on Spectacular Spider-Man. For example, writing like arcs for the trade, working in an office versus working from home, the metrics for success and approaches to continuity and crossover events, death of thought bubbles, multimedia synergy, frequent number ones.
That's a
he
small
just wants
one.
to know if you'd be interested, if you have challenges or some sort of learning curve to have to adapt to these industry changes.
There's a lot in there.
I know,
Losing
it's a-
thought
it's a-
bubbles.
Pick and choose. It's fine.
Losing thought bubbles was a big. Back when I was doing Gargoyles at SLG in 2008-ish or 7, Greg probably knows better than me when those books came out.
No, you were right.
And my editor at SLG is like, "Oh, don't use thought bubbles." I'm like, "What? Oh, that's so old-fashioned. No one uses thought bubbles anymore." I'm like, "You're kidding me."
Oh
And
man.
sort of like,
Adam, Jesus.
why would you take that tool away from a writer?
Yeah.
But I guess it's just, we use captions now. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess. It felt like some kind of bowing down to some other medium. That captions are more indirect, because I used to on Captain Atom use both way back in the Middle Ages when I wrote Captain Atom. I use both because one feels like narration.
Yeah.
And one feels like more immediate, the thought in your head that second, and I'm like, why would you remove one of your tools from this unique medium? And my editor at the time was just sort of like, well, I'm not telling you you can't do it, but it really will label your book as being old-fashioned. So I stopped. In terms of working at home versus working at the office, when I was on staff at DC, I was an editor. When I was writing Captain Atom, I was doing that at home at night. I wasn't writing Captain Atom from an office. That would be what you call a conflict of interest, and me working freelance on company time would have been very frowned upon. And so that hasn't really changed. Working at home to do freelance work has kind of been the deal from day one. What were some of the other things on that list?
Crossover events, multimedia
crossover
synergy.
events, yeah. So I have rarely been part of crossover events. I've always wondered what that was like. I've heard it's a nightmare.
That wouldn't shock me. Yeah.
But when I started on Spectacular, it was just at the tail end of their gang war thing, right? So I was sort of too late for that. But I remember in a few interviews, maybe with you, Zach, I can't recall specifically, but I know in a few interviews I said, hey, if they want us to be part of the next one, that's great. And I was sort of eager just to see what it was like to sort of be brought in and be part of that. I'd been that at DC on the editorial side when crossovers were a new thing, a little bit on Legends and Millennium. But that was so long ago. And I was always at best tangential, like an issue of Captain Atom that was like an epilogue with Black Manta. But wasn't really part of the core of the crossover at all. So I was kind of curious to try that, to be part of one of these summits and sort of figure out how the book weaves in. But then by the time they were coming up on their next one, I think they already knew I was canceled. So it was like, oh, just let him finish out his stuff. He doesn't have to deal with this horrific thing or whatever. And it'll be easier on him. And they're not wrong. But again, I just keep missing out on crossovers. I've just never quite been in the right place at the right time for at either DC or Marvel. Certainly, we haven't done any crossovers at Dynamite until now, where we're doing Fantastic Four Gargoyles. But
I love that.
You're not quite done at Marvel yet, right?
No, I've got 2 books left to come out. I did a story for Fantastic Four anthology book that I think turned out real sweet. Mark Bagley did the art for it. And then we're doing 2 crossovers with Gargoyles Fantastic Four, one that Dynamite's putting out and one that Marvel's putting out. And I've written all these scripts already, so my work is done, but I've still got a couple things left to come out.
Yeah, I know on Free Comic Book Day, Demona, the 0 one-shot, they got at the very end, you get the tease for the crossover. I know you guys are going to talk about that extensively on Voices from the Eyrie, but a couple of last final thoughts as we wrap this episode up. I just want to thank you for coming back. It was kind of fun for us to talk to you before the first issue came out, and now as the last issue is coming out, to kind of be able to talk about the series as a whole without having to worry about spoilers. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, me too.
And I also want to thank you.
Ashley's question, I want to answer it because I don't want Ashley to die.
I'm so sorry. I didn't even realize you were paying attention to that over there. So
I wasn't
damn.
A lot of attention, but that sort of caught my eye.
I'm really hoping you can catch
I
me. I
started adding the name tags partway through the series because I really was getting obnoxious about expanding the supporting cast with more and more and more characters. And at some point I thought, this is really going to start getting difficult for readers to know
who
everyone is. In particular, because I had a whole bunch of women with long dark hair.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just worked out that way. Both in terms of supporting characters that were chosen and then their ethnicities and stuff. And I just was like, I think a scorecard wouldn't hurt here and there. So I
kept saying it, so
trying to make up for my proclivity to just keep including more and more characters. And I thought this is a pretty harmless way to, doesn't really, as a reader, it doesn't present a roadblock. It's just a little help. It doesn't sort of stop things in their tracks. Instead of having to constantly have some character who's been in a conversation say, and Janice, when you are a barista here, I can just put that little caption in
and you put who they were too, which I fully appreciated, because unlike everybody else on this, I'm not on that same level with knowing these things. So you adding that really made it for me. It really helped the book at the end and stuff to be able to differentiate characters, know who they were, things of that nature. So I really appreciated it.
Good. I'm glad. I thought it was helpful. So
it was.
And now Greg, it was very helpful.
It was very helpful because I kept saying it the entire time. So I appreciated, I felt like I was listened to without being listened to. So
I also thought for me, it was amusing because I kept adding more characters. So I kept having to do more of it. And then at one point in the last, not the last issue, but in the 13, I think, there are 3 paramedics who come in and then a doctor and 2 nurses who come in to help Anna when she's electrocuted. And I added captions for all of them, named them all. And Nick actually took those out. I think this is ridiculous. This is getting out of control. You're not going to make these paramedics regulars in the series.
They had to be. Maybe they needed to be.
These 2 nurses regulars in the series. They're just the paramedics and the doctor and the nurses, and that's it.
In the next arc, they would be regulars, the Coffee Bean Gang version 3.
Yeah,
I actually had them in at the end of 15, and it was like, no, they're not going to be here.
So wait, Greg,
the truth comes out.
What were their names, just for posterity's sake?
They were all mixes of the actors who did those little motion comics for us. So it was like Zeno Keaton and Josh Robinson and Lacey Fazal and Zara Chabert, stuff like that. Anyone who did a voice for us on the motion comic. I took their first name and gave it to one character, and their last name and gave it to another character.
Cool.
But I think Nick was probably right. I probably was a little out of control as usual. But
Till the next coffee being group.
Just let him indulge a
session.
little bit, Nick.
Yeah.
It's okay. Just give him his thing.
you can
I
see
also
Nick's
have to-
farewell notice. You know, sort of on the one hand, it sounds really nice, but it's also, you know, I'm not aware of a writer who loves a supporting cast as much as Greg does. And I know that's a double-edged sword. He's praising me, and he's also pointing out the thing that drove him crazy.
You know, I also have to thank you for our last interview that we did. We had the clip of the talk about Across the Spider-Verse. That thing went crazy viral for us, so I got to thank you for that. Even though that was completely unintentional, but it also, I don't know if you know this, was translated into Spanish and recently reshared. So it's now it's got the clip of you talking about it with like Spanish subtitles. So
Right,
which is
international.
great. So Greg, we really do appreciate you. We know you got to get out of here.
I really do, because it's my wife's birthday, and I'm taking her to dinner.
Yeah,
Well,
enjoy dinner.
Wish
Enjoy
her
your
a
happy
happy
birthday
birthday
to
from
her.
all of us, and appreciate you taking the time with us.
Hey, honey, some internet strangers said happy birthday.
That's great. Love you guys. I really have to go. I'm looking at the time, and I really need to go right now.
All right. See you, Greg.
Touch base with you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Once again, thank you guys for listening to this episode, or if you're watching us live here on YouTube, we really do appreciate it. This interview was pre-recorded, and there was some questions we didn't get to, which I hate, but so, you know, I do lament that there was a few questions that we had gotten from our lovely members of our Discord. Part of the problem with that was we just ran out of time. We had a specific time period, as was mentioned, and so I just felt like couldn't get all the questions I wanted in, and some of them were really, really good. So we really appreciate everybody that did write in and did help us out. Turned out we had a lot more questions than I thought. You know, it's crazy. Every time I talk to Greg, I always get worried that I'm not going to have enough questions to tailor an episode, and then I get with Greg, and it ends up being well over an hour and a half, and it never felt stiff or forced, and just always a great conversation. So thank you to Greg. If you liked hearing Greg talk with us, you can always listen to Voices from the Eyrie, a Gargoyles podcast. It is available on all audio podcasting platforms, as well as Spectacular Radio, where we talk about the Spectacular Spider-Man animated series here on the channel, here on the Spideydude Radio Network. And of course, speaking of, the video versions of Voices from the Eyrie are available on our Patreon page, patreon.com/Spideydude Network. And as we get out of here, I always try to give our shout-outs at the end of each episode. We've got our sensational tier patrons of Allison, Cindy, Casey, Doug, Ed, Eric, Georgia, Greg, Janelle, Jessica, Joyce, Catherine, Kale, Laura Howard, Lump Moose, Master German, Phoenician, RJ, Vanessa, and Vicky. Thank you guys for your support over on the Patreon page. And then, of course, we have our spectacular patrons of Sarah and Tara, and our VIPs, Vinkman and Walter. Thank you guys all for your support over on the Patreon page, patreon.com/Spideydude Network. Always really do appreciate it. And you do see, if you're watching us on YouTube, our friendly neighborhoods here, but they get the audio shout out at the beginning of each and every audio only episodes. So, all right. If you like that type of content, we got more Books of X coming up. We have more episodes of the Spideydude Experience, as well as the Ultimate Spideydude Experience. And, of course, our Vault series of Spectacular Radio and Clone Saga Chronicles, the show that started it all here on the channel. We got more Make My Mayday coming up later on, as of this recording later this week. And, of course, we've got some more episodes dropping of Salby Sim Era podcast. Now we are in the post-Maximum Carnage era of Spectacular Spider-Man. So more to come with that. Once again, we want to thank everybody for watching. If you're watching us live or you're listening to us after the fact, follow us on the social media so that way you can be updated as to when we have more future episodes or when the new audio editions drop. Find us over on Twitter at Spideydude Radio, at Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, All that at Spideydude Network. And then, of course, if you have not already subscribed, if you're listening to this on the audio edition, go find us on YouTube at Spideydude Radio Network on YouTube. And then, of course, if you want your voice to be heard on each and every episode, you can always leave us a voicemail, 818-925-6631. That is the voicemail line for the entire Spideydude Radio Network. Be sure to let us know which show you're calling for, unless you're Walter and you're just going to call in the middle of Spideydude Experience. So, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. Next episode will be our review of the final issue of Spectacular Spider-Man, issue number 15. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.